This is target 2B, linear relations and functions. And our objectives, you will evaluate the domain and range of a function. You will understand how function notation can be applied to real-world examples. All right, so first things first. A function is a relation in which the members of the domain, remember domain is x values. Do not repeat that part's a review. So for every x value, there's only one y value that corresponds to it. Okay, y values can be repeated. So function notation, that part was reviewed. This part, okay, when we know that a relation is a function, the y in the equation can be replaced with f of x. Okay, it's simply a notation to designate a function. It's pronounced f of x. Now, I've mentioned it before, but you might see something like, g of c, and you might have the equation that would follow, or the expression that would follow would be like 3c minus 4. So as long as this and this match up, okay, it's still a function. It doesn't have to be f of x. That's just the one that's most commonly used. The f names the function. The x tells the variable that is being used. So again, this tells you that c is being used, and we're going to call this function g instead of the typical f. But you could just use f. That's the one you'll see most often. So the value of a function, okay, so we've got this equation, y equals x minus 2, and it represents a function, so we can also write it as f of x equals x minus 2. So problem that you might have would say, given f of x equals x minus 2, find the value of the function when the domain is 4. Now remember, domain is x, so that's like saying x equals 4. So we take our equation and we replace the x with the 4, like I did here. So you just do f of 4, so here you replace the x with 4 also, equals 4 minus 2, which is just 2. So all you're doing is plugging in when it says when the domain is, you plug that in for x. All right? Now, given g of s equals 2s plus 3, find the value of the function when the domain is negative 2. So that's like saying x is negative 2, or in this case, s. So let's change that to an s. Where'd it go? We'll change that to an s. So that's like saying the g of negative 2, because see how I replaced it there, equals 2 times negative 2, because I replaced the s with negative 2, plus 3. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Keep the 3. And negative 4 plus 3 is negative 1. So g of negative 2 equals negative 1, or the solution is negative 1. So let's take a look at an example that you might see on a quiz or a test. Hint, hint. So given f of x equals 3x plus 5, find the value of the function when the domain is negative 4. So I take my original function that they gave me, and since we know the domain is x, we say x equals negative 4. So anywhere in here you see an x, you replace it with negative 4. Now this, we don't actually do anything with this. We just keep that there. It doesn't change. It just stays the same throughout. So this, we say that f of negative 4 equals 3x, which we're going to replace with negative 4. So 3 times negative 4 plus 5, which equals negative 12 plus 5, which equals negative 7. See how easy it is? Okay, let's take a look at another example. Given that a value in the range is 15, find the value of the domain when h of x equals negative 3x plus 6. Now, you need to be careful when you're reading these problems, because notice in this I underlined range because it's important. On a quiz or a test, it's not going to be underlined. So you need to be aware of that. And remember, range equals y. Okay, and remember y and the function notation are basically the same. So we're going to take this part, okay, here I'll erase that so it's covered up. So basically what I'm saying is remember that range is the y or f of x type, the function notation value. If you see either a y or a function notation when they give you the range, Plug that number in and solve for x instead, because we don't know what x or the domain is. So we say, okay, well, since the range is 15, I'm taking this whole thing and putting in 15. And 15 equals negative 3x plus 6. I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides, which is going to leave me with 9 on this side because this cancels out. So 9 equals negative 3x. Divide both sides by negative 3, and you get x equals negative 3. These cancel out. 9 divided by negative 3 is negative 3. All right, now, another thing you're going to be asked to do is explain the steps to solving a function. So not write it out, but verbally explain it or write it out instead of actually doing it. So basically, if I give you this equation and I say express how to find the output or the range for a given input, remember input is x, output is y. So if I'm asking you how to tell me how you would solve for y if you knew what the x was, which is what I'm asking, just basically write out the steps. Well, I would square the input, which is the x, because it's x squared. And then I would take that number and multiply that by 2, because of the 2 in front of the x squared, because 2 is a coefficient. And then I would add 4 to the answer. So basically, say, okay, let's say I said that x equals 2. How would I solve this problem when x equals 2? So you could say, well, first I'd have to square the 2, which is what that is. Okay, so that would give me 2 times 4. And then what would I do? I'd take that 4 and I'd multiply it by 2, which would give me 8. And then I would add 4 to that answer because that would be the final step. So that's just an example. If it helps, pick a number and just do that on the side and say, okay, what did I do in the problem? Okay, next example, express how to find the output of 5x cubed minus 8 for a given input. So first things first, what would you do? You'd take your input or your x value and you would cube it or raise it to the third power, however you want to look at it. Next, you would multiply that answer by 5 because of the 5 in front of that x cubed. And then you would subtract 8 from that answer because that's what I'm doing here, right? So subtracting 8, and that's it. That is it. All right, so now a word problem. So we've got a bucket that holds 15 gallons of water. You notice a hole in the bottom, in the bottom that the water is escaping out of at a rate of 2 gallons per hour. How many gallons are going to be left in the bucket after 4 hours? Okay, so show how we arrived at our answer. So we started off with 15 gallons of water. Okay, and that means that's what we're starting with. And it's losing water, so we're going to be subtracting. We're losing 2 gallons per hour. Remember I said that anytime you see that per, that means there's a variable with it. So 15 minus 2x. So like if it was 1 hour, we'd lose 2 gallons. If it was 2 hours, 2 times 2 would be, 4. So we take that equation and say we want to know how many gallons are going to be in the bucket after 4 hours. So we're basically saying if we have f of x, what is f of x when x equals 4? So go ahead and say, well, f of 4 equals 15 minus 2 times 4, which is 8. Okay, and 15 minus 8 is 7. So there'd be 7 gallons left after 4 hours. So here's an example of that problem. A bucket holds 18 gallons of water. You notice a hole in the bottom that the bucket is escaping out of at a rate of 3 gallons per hour. How many gallons will be in the bucket after 2 hours? So, again, we're starting off with 18 gallons of water. We're losing water at a rate of 3 gallons per hour. So the 18, that's our constant. That's the thing that's not changing. So that's going to go first. And then the variable would be with the 3. So minus 3x. And we want to know how many gallons are going to be in the bucket after 2 hours. So we're going to replace that x with 2, which is going to give us 18 minus 3 times 2. And 3 times 2 is 6. So 18 minus 6 equals 12. And there will be 12 gallons left after 2 hours. So some tips. Make sure you read the problems carefully so you know what you're being asked to solve for. What I mean by that is like domain and range. If they're asking you to solve for the range, you are solving for the y and you're given the x. If they ask you to solve for the domain, then it's the other way around. Might be a little confusing to read about, but in practice, hopefully you'll get it without too much of a problem. So, and I am there to help you. So don't worry, this is a shorter unit, so you're not going to be overwhelmed with lots of stuff to learn. All right, that's it. Have a good one.